Hello, reckless writers! A wise man once said, first of all, look after the first person. We were supposed to be doing third person, but we ended the last episode and realised we had a bit more to say. So we're back on the first person, on writing without a license. Mel, what is it you want to say about the first person then?
I realised I really wanted to say that writing in tense is like in the correct tense, whichever one you're planning on using, is so much harder in first person. I've found, and I feel like I've also noticed writers like published writers messing it up often enough as well, because I feel
As
like when
in,
you're in first,
as in mixing up like past and present and such.
yeah, so you're trying to write in like past tense, let's say, and all of a sudden there's a sentence where the character is like, I'm going to the supermarket right now. Oh, there's Dave. And it's like, shouldn't it be? And like, there was Dave, not there is Dave, or something like that. Um, this is a really bad example. But I think the reason it happens is when you're writing in first person, you kind of put yourself in the character's shoes a lot more. And then you're like kind of imagining it happening in your head and you're there. So you write it as if it's happening right in that moment, which people do with third person, but it's so much harder with first. And I think there's another problem to it as well, in that when are you writing from? Are you writing from 20 years in the future when they're an adult and they've finished this escapade, misadventure? Or are you writing in like journals at the end of each little bit, which is what happens in Darren Shan. Darren Shan gets out his journal and he pens what's just happened. So everything's written in past tense, but it's happened recently to him. He doesn't know what happens after that, usually.
And whether you're going to make a point of that. Like, is that something you're going to fold into the structure? Is it purposeful? It's a diary at the end of each day. Or is it just, that's kind of the tense you want to tell it in? Because you don't ever have to address that. But you should have a decision made.
Yeah, you definitely need to make a decision.
Even if it's just present tense.
Yeah, I feel like that's a bad decision.
I don't mind it.
I feel like it's too much. Like, this is coming from someone who loves first person narrations generally. Like, when it's in present tense, it feels too much sometimes.
Falls into that category of it's very purposeful. Like, every part of writing is a decision on your part. But some decisions fall into like a default. Like, if you're writing in just first person past or third person, a lot of it doesn't, you don't need a reason for doing it. You can just do it. Like, the reason is because you need one and you picked it. Whereas some stuff like first person present or the rare second person book, like, you've got to be doing it because you can get something out of it. We have a friend who's very keen on writing stuff and going, oh, I should do this completely different to everyone else. And which is all well and good. And it's like, yes, you can do that. The problem being is, but what is that doing that's so good to make the reader overcome being pulled out of the story? There was a good example, and it annoys me, I can't think of the name of it, of a book written in second person. But it's all because it's someone dealing with someone with Alzheimer's. So it's them telling the person's life back to them about what you were doing, how you did this. And Mel's face, exactly, it's very purposeful. There's a reason behind it. A book that's got nothing to do with why it's in second person is going to pull people out and going to pull people away from what the story actually is, because it's like, why don't you just do it the easier way?
Yeah.
Whereas when it's a meaning or when it's the core of the story, that opens the door for something special. But just something to keep in mind with that.
For sure.
So with yours at the moment, when is it written?
I keep changing my mind.
Is that why you wanted to bring it up?
Yeah. I started off thinking like, oh, I'll do similar to what Darren Shan did, because I really liked the idea of the narrator has like sort of just experienced this, so we're writing from the past, but the narrator still grows over the narrative. Like, it's not written 20 years in the future and they're like, oh yeah, and then stupid me, stupid child, did child things. Can you imagine? No, I want my narrator to grow. So I think writing it from like recent past, but like sort of getting that across to my reader, I found has been quite difficult.
Yeah. Without
and
starting it off with Dear Diary.
Yeah. And I've started reading Wolf Song by TJ Klune recently, and I'm not sure when that's told from, but at the beginning of the book at least, it starts with like when I was 9 years old, or like when I was 12 years old. It like jumps around in his life, and I'm never quite sure who's telling it, but also I don't really mind because it gives off like literary vibes, so I'm like, ooh, I'm engaged. Whereas I'm not writing something that's supposed to be literary. I'm trying to write something that's like a bit pulpy, you know. It's to be enjoyed. It's YA. It's specifically like YA, and I want it to feel like that.
Yeah.
So I need more of an answer.
Often for me, it comes down to how much information you want the character to know, and how much information you want the narrator to know. Both for first person and for when you're writing first person from. If you're writing it at the end of their adventure, sort of Hobbit style, then you can throw in more stuff. You can. I don't particularly like it in books, but I've seen it happen enough to know that it's not unusual. To be like, and that was the last time we ever saw them. Well, little did we know. Which, whilst annoys me, it also sets a good pace for knowing when it's written from. Like, you come across a line like that, you immediately know, oh, it's written long after the story. Like, this whole book was written after they finished. Which then can be used to kill off the character with greater suspense.
That's something we didn't talk about. What if you want to kill off your first person narrator? What the heck do you do then?
End the story.
The new story, new narrator.
The end.
Depends. I've seen it done.
This is all written.
Twice. I love it. Kill
It's
off
good.
the first person narrator. It's like, whoa. Whose eyes am I seeing through now?
And another good example of writing this style for a purpose. Like, I do feel like books are split into the things you write to enable other stuff and the things you write to purposely change it. Like I say, you can write third person to enable the rest of the story. You can write first person because you want to kill them off with it as a great twist at the end. You can set the characters off with the right sort of setting. I mean, and that's the thing, you've got options. Like, if you browse the online forums for writing and such, they're completely filled with a, can I do this? And a lot of the time, the answer is yes. You know, it's your book. Some things are going to work better than others, but anything done well will sell. So, for instance, you're killing off a first-person narrator. How you end it, you know, it's your choice. You could just have it end. You could have them talk from the afterlife for a chapter. You could switch to a viewpoint of their nearest and dearest and view the aftermath. Hell, you could kill off the character halfway through the story and switch to the other person. Yeah, you can do anything you want in your book, and some stuff will work better than others. But Like, that's the whole point of this podcast. You know, you don't need a license. You don't have to pass a test. There is no right or wrong for writing. There's just what kind of works.
And is it for you or for your readers?
Oh, this is for you. But to move on from that, what are some hard and fast rules we should follow when we're doing first person and changing from different ages of narrator or styles of narrator or gender or lifespan? How do you differentiate one narrator from the other?
So, I'm really not that far into Wolfsong, but it does the the thing you do in a third person perspective book when you have multiple viewpoints or like multiple characters that you follow, where at the start of like each chapter or bit, when you're following a new character, you say, this character did this, and we know we're on that character. In Wolfsong, it's like, I was 9 years old when I did this. I was 12 years old when this happened to me.
Okay.
And that's kind of how it... So they're almost like different characters, but they're not quite. The thing that interested me is that so far, the voice narrating is the same. So it doesn't get any younger or older between these. Like, I mean, I've only seen child perspective so far. Like, the narrated speech changes because different ages, but like the narrator overall is fairly similar. And often a lot of the sentences are not ones that could be constructed by a child, even though it's told like sort of from that moment. And that's another thing that like I spend a lot of time thinking about when thinking about writing first person or when I'm reading first person, is that to what extent does your narration have to be something that this character can create? Like if you're writing from the perspective of a beggar who's had no education whatsoever, can you use the word... I'm trying to think of a nice good word and I can't think of one. Oh.
Eclectic.
Eclectic. What's the one I came up with the other day? That's not it. Oh well. But yeah, things like eclectic. Can a beggar use the word eclectic? I mean, maybe they can, but like, where did they know it from if they've never been educated? Who taught them it?
And then, I mean, that falls back into what I was saying before about pulling out the story. Is, sure, there's no reason why a beggar wouldn't know the word eclectic. But if you're reading it or if the reader's reading it and they come across it and they go, would a beggar know the word eclectic? It's not ideal. It's going to pull them from the story. It's going to disrupt the pacing that you've so delicately placed out.
So, potentially, but would I want to read a book written by a beggar with no education?
Yes,
possibly
actually,
not.
It's a good one. What's it called? Jesus Boots, I think.
I don't think I've heard of that one.
It's quite fun. It's kind of a dual split narrative of you've got a young kid that runs away from home and ends up homeless on the streets. And then it follows this other guy who's going around decided he's going to kill off homeless people. And you get to see him like working it out as they slowly get closer to meeting each other.
So potentially I'd want to. But generally...
It's just you being snobby. I don't want to read about uneducated people.
No, but I'm more thinking like I don't want to read a book where all of the sentences are like really short and potentially have typos, because that might be realistic to what this character would write. That might be realistic to what they're capable of.
That brings us on to a good point, actually, of the split of narrator and author. And remembering that the two are separate. You are writing the voice of someone else. I mean, sure, it could be based on you, but if you carry on writing, eventually you're going to want to write a book that isn't about you.
We hope.
I don't know you personally. You might, but I recommend against it. but you can write a character who, say, talks a certain way, talks cleverer than you do. Takes a bit more effort, but it's doable. And it's something that's worth keeping in mind to help strengthen the voice of, are you just writing as you, or are you writing as the character? And it's a good thing to keep in mind when you're doing an editing pass. I find that I slip out of voice all the time when I'm writing. I have to purposely go through, like, chapter by chapter and going, okay, am I still following this character? There is an issue with first-person writing. And I want to get your opinion on how to overcome it. Of how do you describe your main character? Should I just have my character wake up, go look in the mirror and describe themselves at the start of chapter 1?
Ooh. I mean, it depends whether you need to or want to. 'Cause like, for me as a kid, like a lot of the ideal of first person was that I live in those shoes, and sometimes describing that first person narrator kind of broke my image of myself as them. Like I relate far more strongly to characters described as having, a fringe and brown long hair. So if you tell me that they have a blonde bob, I'm just like, I'm already distanced it a little bit. However, that doesn't mean that I don't like to know what my characters look like. So I think it depends. Like sometimes there's a reason to not do it. Maybe more so in YA.
I remember reading one book where the character never revealed their name.
Oh no.
Yeah, but it was really well written. Like, you didn't realize that until you get to the end when you go to discuss the character and you'd be like, "Oh, I don't know what they're called."
But if you did want to describe them,
how's the best way? Because, I mean, this is coming off me saying you can do whatever you want in your book, but ideally, don't have them walk up to a mirror and describe themselves. It's been done 100 times, and it's been done badly 100 times.
Yeah, to be honest, if there's not something like special about them, you probably don't need to describe them beyond, like, the gender is sometimes important for the narrative, and age, and then what else is really special? Like, a lot of it you can communicate in other ways. Like, I pulled at my brown hair. It's like, do you really need to indicate the length of their nose because that's the only time you're gonna be looking in a mirror? I think clothes usually say more about a person.
That's
and then
true.
it's like, I put on my clothes, but then again, it's like, is it important? Are they dressed for work even though they're going to the beach? That's important.
I mean, and that's the key, is folding the descriptions into the narrative, of highlighting the important things because they're the things that matter in the narrative. So I think if say they're wearing flip-flops while going to the office, they're going to look down and go, "Oh, damn it, I've put on the wrong shoes today." It's a notable thing. If you think about in your daily life, how often you think about what you're wearing or what you look like, the key is to fold in those moments. Are you wearing a shirt that's too tight and you sit down awkwardly and have to reshuffle it? Are you wearing shoes that the laces come undone and you get annoyed because these laces always get undone? It's the little moments that it's not just you saying, "Oh, I'm wearing these shoes." It's giving those objects purpose to be in your story and deciding when an object does need to be in the story and when you can just skip over what colour shirt they're wearing because it doesn't really matter. As long as you're creating a strong voice and creating a strong character, people will make their own assumptions and it won't really matter.
Definitely. Strongly agree with that.
A good example being, to hark back to last episode, is Dresden Files, where the character's famous for wearing a long leather duster. And Dresden Files will hang me for this, but I don't remember the exact type of coat. There's a specific coat he wears. But that's the thing, that comes up because it's important to him. He magically enchants it and all the etc. But he cares about this particular coat, and he wears this particular coat, and he makes a point of mentioning this. The rest of his clothes, not so much. They're just whatever he throws on. But because the coat is a key feature, because the coat is important to the character, you know exactly about that. And so if you really do want to stray away from the generic side of letting anyone step into the shoes, I find copying that, of having a few or even just one key item of clothing that they've folded into their personality, can really help.
You may or may not want to delete this, but I did find Harry Dresden's description of himself to be a bit much.
No, it's fair.
I mean, the coat is like, yeah, it was clearly important to him, and whilst a bit tropey, I don't mind it. But he did also describe himself as like, a tall, lanky man. He did describe his facial features, and I was like, can we move on? Can we move on? Don't care what your face is like.
And that is the example of it doing badly at that point. Let's say the early books are rough. And it's why it's not that important to describe everything. You think it is, because it's kind of, in
it's
school
important
especially.
to you, like as an author. Because like you see them and you're like, oh, I want to tell everyone about this, but like just let people have their own ideas and a bit of control over your story, and they'll have a much better time.
The key is by implication. Give one or two key items that imply the rest of it. And it's not, the best example I've got doesn't relate to appearance, but it applies to across the board for good descriptions. Of, if they say you went down to the basement and the light was dusty and hung without a light shade and flickered, you've got kind of an image of what the rest of the basement looks like. Versus if I say you go down to the basement and the warm lamp lights flicker on. Like, one item implies a lot of the other. So, is there any last point you'd like to make about first person before we move on for definite next week?
My last point was to ask you if you'd ever, if you remember reading a first person that just, utterly threw you off. Because even as someone who likes it, I do have memories of that.
Not really.
No. Do you read first person a lot?
No, not really.
No.
Mainly third person. / I don't think I've read any first person since I started writing and started paying more attention to that aspect. Like, I read a lot, had a break, and then got back into reading and then started writing. And so the main stuff I read in that small gap have all been kind of third person.
Well, if that's what you're focused on writing, it makes sense to read that.
Not purposeful, just by chance.
For me, it's purposeful. I've started writing first person, so it's I need to read more first person. I need to get back into it. So
chances are I'll do that at some point.
That's good. It's a ride.
I mean, and that's, I'm getting very, I don't know what the word is, which is great for a writer, but I'm very specific about this episode of talking directly to you, the listener at home, or wherever you might be, of, reading is good. We covered the whole episode on this, but often once you start paying attention to the elements of your story, and you hit an element you're not that familiar with, or you don't have enough experience, or you might have read 101 first-person books, but you're not quite sure how to write it, is going back to those books, or finding new ones, finding good examples, bad examples, and studying them, of reading through them and seeing what things are doing well and what things are doing badly, and how you can learn from that. Sometimes examples are the best way to learn.
The most painful, let me add. Don't like picking up a book and going, oh god, I'm so bad. It just happened like just recently. Wolfsong seems to be amazing for me, and I'm like, I'm doing it wrong.
With that optimistic yet depressing note, that's all we have time for. So when you find yourself writing and asking questions, remember, you don't have to pass a test. You've just got to write. Was that too dramatic? I felt like that might have been too dramatic.
No.